Welcome back to Face the Nation and to our conversation with Pennsylvania Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Senator, just a moment ago, you were saying, rightfully, that it is well within the president's team's legal right to raise questions or to ask for recounts. But there's a whole lot of noise being made by a lot of presidential allies who are alleging far more than that, using terms like fraud, rigged. In fact, Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, saying he's asking the Justice Department to investigate claims here. There are 9 GOP congressmen from your state who are questioning the integrity of election officials. Isn't this damaging overall to our democracy?
Every election has some irregularities. We've had some in Pennsylvania in the past. We had some in Pennsylvania this time. They should be adjudicated. If people have seen, if there is evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, by all means, go into a federal court, get it corrected, punish the wrongdoers, correct the vote count, do what we need to do. That's what I think should happen. Apparently, there are going to be a lot of lawsuits tomorrow. We'll see the evidence. We'll see what the allegations are. I have confidence in our federal judiciary to make the right decisions about them, and then we'll be able to wrap this up and move on.
So to be clear, you have seen none of the evidence that the president's lawyers say they have about your state.
Well, to be clear, for instance, there are some problems that need to be solved. For instance, in Pennsylvania, unfortunately, we have a rogue state Supreme Court that violated the U.S. Constitution and violated Pennsylvania law by declaring that ballots arriving after the election day can be counted, even though our statute forbids that. So that needs to be adjudicated. Those ballots should not be counted. Now, I don't think those are enough.
Those ballots have been segregated, and CBS News has learned about 8,500 of them.
Okay. So I think the number is probably not big enough to determine the outcome of the election, but observers in Philadelphia, anyway, have not been able to get close enough to understand how that segregation has occurred. This is the kind of thing that should just be clarified. As I say, I don't think it's going to be nearly a large enough scale to change the outcome of the election, but it's understandable that people would want that corrected. And we should, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is future elections.
Broadly, I want to know what you think the message from this election was. The Republican Party has remade itself as the party of Trump. Do you believe that is still the mandate?
Well, I will tell you, unambiguously, this was a rejection of the radicalism that has increasingly been the driving force in the Democratic Party. The woke left had a major setback. I mean, nobody thought we were going to pick up seats in the House. Nobody thought we were going to hold the Senate, which I think is likely. We didn't lose a single legislative body across the country.
But the president also didn't take your
in our
state.
State House and Senate. That's right. And I think, there's no question that personality traits and character traits of the president rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and that was probably problematic for the president. It certainly was. But the outcomes, this administration has been remarkably successful with economic outcomes, with foreign policy. So I think the policies have been accepted, and the broad Republican victories down ballot suggest that.
All right. Senator Toomey, thank you for your insights today. And we want to take a closer look now at some of the legal questions the president's team is raising with CBS News contributor and election law expert David Becker. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
You just heard the senator from Pennsylvania and his description of what's going on in his state. What's your reaction?
Well, he's right about a couple of things. He's right that right now Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, leads by a margin outside of the recount margin, and actually that margin is likely to grow. It's around 41,000 right now, and it's likely to grow beyond President Trump's victory margin of 2016 of 44,000 later today. So it's very unlikely there'll be an automatic recount in Pennsylvania. He's also right that the election overall was very good for Republicans. They did very well nationwide. They held the Senate. They gained seats in the House. They did very well in state legislative races. And any baseless accusations that the election lacked integrity actually cast doubt on those results as well as the president's results. I think in Pennsylvania specifically, there are some claims regarding observers that are false. We know from Republican election officials in Philadelphia that observers for the Trump campaign and the Republican Party were present in the counting rooms at all times. They could see everything that was going on whenever ballots were out.
There's actually a live camera.
Yeah, there's 24/7 live stream. There's recordings of there's extensive evidence of this. And as you noted, the ballots that arrived after Election Day have not been counted yet. They have not been reported. All of the ballots that we're seeing right now, the vote counts in Pennsylvania, they all reflect ballots that were received on Election Day or earlier. So those ballots that were issued, those very small number of ballots, perhaps 8,500 of them, that have been segregated pursuant to the Supreme Court's order, they have not been counted or reported out yet. And in fact, if you're behind, as President Trump is right now in Pennsylvania, it's unusual that you're not asking for those ballots to be counted because you might need more ballots to narrow the margin.
So can you help us make sense of what the Trump strategy may be here? Our reporter, Nicole Skenga, spoke to some members of the Trump team, and the strategy was described to her as planning to win the Georgia recount and point out irregularities in Wisconsin. That still doesn't get you to 270 electoral votes. What is the strategy?
It's very hard to determine a coherent strategy here because, for instance, in Arizona, you see them arguing to count more votes. In Pennsylvania, they're saying stop the count. In Wisconsin, the margin of victory for President-elect Biden is about the same as Trump's margin of victory in 2016, which a recount upheld. It's very, very unusual. In fact, there's no precedent in American history for a margin of thousands of votes to be overturned in a statewide race. Other guests have mentioned this.
So,
yeah.
Am I hearing you say this is more of a PR strategy than a legal one?
That's what it appears to be. I mean, if you look at Florida 2000, you had two very competent teams of legal teams. And in fact, 3 members of that team on the Republican side are now sitting on the Supreme Court. And they went down and collected facts for weeks and then litigated that out through the court system. What we're seeing now is crazy allegations being thrown around on Twitter and elsewhere, and when it goes to court, they fall apart. There's nothing there. They've been losing every case that has been brought post-election. The Trump campaign has, and so it does appear it might be more of a PR stunt than it is an actual cohesive legal theory.
So to be fair to those, because there are some big names involved in this. Senator Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, says he has a sworn affidavit from a postal worker in Pennsylvania. Rudy Giuliani, the president's attorney, also claims he has affidavits. Can people just lie and get away with it, or are these affidavits actual evidence that needs to be considered at this point?
This is why we don't litigate cases outside of landscaping companies. This is why we actually go to court and require proof. And every time they brought this proof to court, that proof has fallen apart and failed.
You're talking about a landscaping company because that's where the Philadelphia press conference was held yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it's important. You can say whatever you want on Twitter. You can say whatever you want when you're being interviewed or at a press conference. But ultimately, you have to prove these allegations in court. And ultimately, each of these allegations has failed. So
the Trump campaign has filed suit in Nevada, Arizona. They have plans for other states, they say. Are any of these significant? I mean, they're also raising money, they say, for a recount in Wisconsin.
So I think the recount strategy is likely to fail because the margins are just too great. We just don't see any historical precedent for overturning margins that great. The margin is growing in Georgia. It's over 10,000 now. The other litigation really doesn't have a strategy, whether it's Sharpie pens in Arizona or whether it's observers in Pennsylvania or the late arriving ballots in Pennsylvania. We're not seeing much there. And so I think it's unlikely.
One thing I didn't get to with the senator was this really troubling incident in Philadelphia at the center where they were counting mail ballots. There were heavily armed men arrested outside. You know a lot of these election workers. Yeah. How concerned are they for their safety right now?
They're very concerned. I talked to some of them yesterday. These are people who have been away from their families for days. They haven't seen them much. One of them, his son just had a birthday, and he had to miss that birthday essentially because he was working the polls. They're getting no sleep. They're getting death threats. Some of them include racist and anti-Semitic language. And then we hear about this threat on their lives. It's shameful. I mean, these are public servants who are doing, they're not always well paid. They're not really well paid at all. They don't get a lot of recognition. You usually only know their names when something goes wrong. They're really heroes of democracy right now.
And they're working amid a pandemic. So thank you. And we thank all of them, all the election workers who helped our democracy function. We'll be right back. The election may be over, but this new surge of coronavirus cases is just now beginning to take off. We want to check in now with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Good morning. The president-elect says his very first priority is dealing with this pandemic, and he's going to name a task force tomorrow. Some of the names released by his campaign include a former Surgeon General from the Obama years, as well as the former Homeland Security advisor. Realistically, what can a group like this do now, since they don't take office till the end of January?
Well, I think the first thing they want to do is come in with a very clear plan, and the president-elect has articulated what he would do. I mean, there's not a lot of novelty to this. We know what works, we know what we need to do, and so they want a plan for how they're going to hit the ground running to try to implement their strategy. The other thing that the president-elect and his team could be doing is working directly with the National Governors Association. We have one president at a time. They cannot govern. They are not in a position to govern. But they can start working with the governors to try to formulate policy through the governors, with the governors, and try to create a more national strategy that way. Because if you're not going to have a federally led national strategy in the next couple of months, and it's going to be led at the state level, you at least want to coordinate across the different states so it starts to have the semblance of a more cohesive plan.
That sounds a pretty grim assessment of what you think the Trump administration might do between November and January to get a hold of the virus.
Well, I'm not sure what they're going to do. I mean, my advice to them would be to get more aggressive. We're past the election. I think they need to focus on what we can be doing nationally. We've been sort of arguing politically over what I think is a false dichotomy, a straw man, that it's really a choice between lockdowns and no lockdowns. And that's not the case. We don't need to shut down the country, close businesses, tell people they need to stay at home to get some measure of control over this virus. We're not going to get perfect control over this virus. It's a contagious virus. It's going to spread. But it doesn't need to spread at the levels and at the velocity that's going to start to press the healthcare system, which is what we're seeing. We're seeing that in Wisconsin now. It's building field hospitals. Utah's building field hospitals. El Paso built their 4th mobile morgue. We're going to have a record number of hospitalizations this week. Now 56,000 people are hospitalized, 11,000 are in the ICU. These are very big numbers nationally, and it's accelerating very quickly.
The president-elect said he wants to quickly appoint a supply commander to oversee production and distribution of testing and then eventually a vaccine, materials, masks, and gowns. You previously said that a lot of these wheels are really already going to be in motion by the time he takes office. Are these realistic expectations for him to be setting?
Well, I think you need to do it anyway. The reality is that by the time the president-elect takes office, we'll probably be at the sort of apex, if you will, of what we're going through right now. This is going to play out over the next couple of months, and I think as the president takes office, we'll be coming down the other side of the epidemic curve, hopefully. And the only question is going to be how many people have died in the course of this and how many people have been infected. And we have to keep those numbers down as much as possible. But there's still a lot you can do, I think, as you come in, trying to make sure you're going to have adequate supplies of drugs, potentially vaccines, if we have a safe and effective vaccine available, and the testing equipment, the supply chain, because this isn't going to be over in 2021. I think 2021 will be much better than this year. But you still want to make sure you have adequate supplies as you come down that epidemic curve and head into the fall in 2021 when we're going to face risks again. But there's still probably a lot you could do in the near term, especially with the supply chain. That's something that can be affected in the near term. Things like durable medical equipment, testing supplies, gloves, gowns, masks.
So there have been a lot of celebratory gatherings in the past 24 hours, mostly with masks, but not all. And I wonder what you think about whether in January we'll even be able to have an inauguration with the usual celebrations.
I don't think we will. I don't think we're going to be able to bring large crowds together for an inauguration. We're going to be right in the thick of probably the worst point of this epidemic wave that we're going through right now. And, the Biden campaign, the Biden team have shown that they're willing to forego the usual trappings of running for office so that they don't expose people unnecessarily. I suspect they're going to take a similar approach to how they handle the inauguration. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we're not going to be able to bring together tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people on the lawn in Washington for a typical inauguration.
Well, we've learned that the president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is now COVID positive. He was at the White House gathering just this week when the president addressed the nation on election night. He had access to testing, regular testing. So I just wonder what the message is for everyday Americans who are thinking about celebrating Thanksgiving and maybe think that if they get a test beforehand, that they're adequately protecting their families. Are they?
Yeah. No, they're not. I mean, the test can help. I think it's prudent to try to get tested if you're going to bring together a group of people. But if you have individuals who are vulnerable in that setting, I think you still need to be very careful if you're going to be exposing younger people in a broader group to older individuals who are vulnerable. If you do that, make sure they're wearing high-quality masks, try to get an N95 mask and have them wear it the whole time. Try to keep people separated and distance where you can. You need to take a layered approach. Testing alone can't create a safe environment, a protective bubble. Even the NHL and the NBA, which had enormous testing, weren't able to use testing alone.
All right, Dr. Gottlieb, great to talk to you. We'll be back in a moment. Around the world, there's been some surprising and some not so surprising reaction from world leaders about the new American president. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams reports from Moscow.
Good morning. Russia's state media has portrayed this U.S. election as chaotic and its democracy as flawed. But even inside the Kremlin, they may be looking forward to a more predictable American president.
America's made its choice, and its choice is a man who rarely leaves his basement, who often doesn't know where he is.
That's RT, often referred to as a Russian propaganda outlet.
4 more years of Georgia,
US intelligence concluded that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, and US officials warned it was doing the same this year, seeking to denigrate Joe Biden. But political analyst Maria Lippman believes that Russia is disappointed in the Trump administration, in part for failing to ease sanctions, and may welcome a more conventional president.
He will be more a kind of man of the establishment, not erratic as Donald Trump. And this in itself is an advantage.
There were no warm congratulations from Iran.
Iran's president has called for the return of the next U.S. administration to its obligations.
He hoped the U.S. would now return to the Iran nuclear deal, which President-elect Biden has pledged to do. China's state media has also revelled in America's election turmoil. But its leaders hope that Joe Biden will resolve the trade war started by President Trump.
I look forward very much to working with President Biden and his team on a lot of crucial stuff for us in the weeks and months ahead.
And the mayor of Paris tweeted simply, "Welcome back, America."
Many of America's allies want to return to U.S. leadership under President-elect Biden, whether it's supporting the World Health Organization or rejoining the Paris Agreement on climate change. Margaret?
Holly Williams in Moscow. Thank you. And we turn now to the one and only Bob Schieffer. Got to give you the final word, Bob. It's good to see you and to see you here in person.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be with you.
Well, you know, you're always so good at putting things in perspective. How do you sum up this week, this election?
We still live in a very divided, deeply divided country, and I don't think there's any question of that. Biden won this election fair and square. As far as we know, I think there's no suggestion of any kind of fraud or anything like that. There are these allegations out there. But I think that will take care of itself. Have the investigations, but I don't think much will come of that. But here's the thing. It's as if President Trump were elected president, not of the United States, but of two different countries. Mm-hmm. Two very different countries. And I think the Democrats have to treat the losing side with the utmost respect and dignity, because they're going to be there. And Joe Biden is going to need their help as well as the help of Democrats to do what needs to be done in this country. It's a huge victory for Democrats, but it is not the shellacking of Trumpism that Democrats were hoping for. 71,000 people voted for Donald Trump. That's a huge number of people out there, and they're going to be they're not going away. The other part is, I don't think Donald Trump is going away. I think he's going to leave the White House, but he's still going to be around. I don't know doing what, but I just don't see him leaving after getting 70 million votes.
Right, with really ardent supporters, too.
Yeah.
So the president-elect has made the right moves in terms of rhetoric to reach out. He said even just last night, I know what it's like to lose and how hard it is. But how do you actually unite a country where these divisions go so deep?
Well, I think you do what Joe Biden has been doing. I think he's been doing pretty much the right thing. since this has been decided. He reached out. He said, I want to be the president of all the people, not just the president of the Democrats. And I think it is important for him to tone down this rhetoric. I mean, not talking about enemies, but talking about opponents. Talking about how people can have two different points of view. I think what the president-elect, and maybe he's already done this, my guess is he probably has, I think the first thing he needs to do is call Mitch McConnell. He knows him. They've been friends for 30 years. I know that Mitch McConnell thinks highly of Joe Biden. Now, I'm not saying call him and then run out and tell everybody on television, I just called Mitch McConnell. Right. Keep it between themselves. There have got to be things that are good for both Joe Biden and for Mitch McConnell. And if they are, then that's good for the country. And I think that's the place to start. How could either of them be hurt by later holding a news conference and saying, we just want everybody to know we're talking?
I love that that's the new benchmark for success. Hey, at least they talked. But what do you think, because the list is so long, what do you think is the most difficult challenge for the new president?
I think just getting people. He's got to get people in his own party together. They got to decide on what the priorities are. There's no question that the COVID has to come first, but he's also got to deal with this economy. And among other things, why couldn't he come up with the two of them come up with some sort of a public works plan where people who can't work in restaurants because it's dangerous could work outside in public works projects? I think there are things like that that can be done and are possible.
Mm-hmm. For those 11 million people still looking for jobs that just haven't come back. Bob, thank you. So good to see you. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. We won't see you next week. Instead, CBS Sports will be broadcasting the Masters starting at 10 a.m. Eastern, but we will see you the Sunday after that. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.